Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. Hey, Thriving Farmers. Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. Today, my guest is Michael Bobbitt, a part-time clam farmer and a novelist based out of Cedar Key, Florida. Alongside his writing career, Michael is a passionate advocate for protecting fragile estuaries, particularly in the face of recent hurricanes, which caused millions of dollars in losses for the Florida clam industry. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so give us a little bit of an update. I know before we hopped on, you were talking to me about just how hard Helene hit your island.
Sure. So this was a once in 10 generation storm event. It's the most significant hurricane we've ever had on the island. We had in places 12 feet of storm surge. So most of our commercial buildings were inundated or totally submerged. About a third of our homes were completely destroyed, and more than half of the homes were flooded. Just a real sort of catastrophic event. But like always in these events, islanders do what they do. We lean on each other, we come together, and our town is torn up, our island is torn up, but our community is strong.
Oh, that's good to hear. So you didn't lose any people during the hurricane?
Yeah, fortunately, no fatalities. We had a few injuries. I stayed behind and stayed on the island during the storm to help some folks that weren't going to leave. And we actually ended up having to rescue two of our elderly neighbors at the height of the storm and drag them through the storm surge and get them into my house on top of a hill. And they rode out the night with me. But
oh, wow.
Fortunately, no significant injuries and no deaths.
That's good. So talk to me a little bit about clams, because I think a lot of farmers, we talk about vegetables, we think about cows, we don't think about clams as a crop. So give us just the overview, and then obviously we can kind of dive into a little bit about how they can get damaged by these type of hurricanes. But yeah, give us an overview here.
Sure. So our little island here is we bounce around between the first or second largest producer of farm-raised clams in North America. And a lot of folks don't know that clams can be grown that way. I think most people are familiar with wild caught clams when you go dig them out of the mud with tongs up in the New England states. And those clams are great, but we're able to grow them here in 4 foot by 4 foot nylon mesh bags. And we'll string 5 or 10 of those bags together in a belt, and we'll plant thousands of those bags out onto the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. And it lets us be able to control that environment. It requires no fertilizer, no feeds, no pesticide. They get all of the nutrients that they need there from the Gulf of Mexico. So on average, our little island here, we're a tiny island of 750 people, $50 million of clams are grown and sold here on our little island. If you buy clams anywhere at Costco or Sam's Club or at a restaurant anywhere in the United States, look on the back of the bag. It probably says a product of Cedar Key.
Fascinating. Okay, so then what makes Cedar Key such an ideal place to grow clams?
So there's no hard scientific evidence about exactly what it is, but there are a collection of factors. One is that our little island is perfectly positioned, sort of halfway between two big rivers, the Wakasasa River and the Swanee River. I think a lot of people know about. So it keeps just an ideal mix of fresh and salt water. Usually, sometimes the rivers flood and we get too much fresh water. But and then on top of that, we have the longest stretch of undeveloped coastline in Florida. We have about a 60-mile stretch that's protected by the Wakasasa State Preserve. So we have extraordinarily good water quality. And what's great about the clam farm industry, other than the fact that it's a good business, I mean, like any farming, there are ups and downs, but there is a real environmental benefit to growing clams. Wherever clam farms are started, normally the state will lease us land in what's otherwise an ecological dead zone, just mud flats, sand bottoms. Within weeks of putting our clam bags down, entire new ecosystems start to thrive. It's just a net positive for the environment. It's the only industry I've ever been a part of where I can feel good about making money and feel like I'm doing something to protect a place that I love.
Absolutely. So what I'm looking at here, I'm looking at like basically Florida, and I see a giant national wildlife preserve. Is where the clam beds is basically all along the edge of that the land there.
Yeah, so if you zoomed in on the island of Cedar Key, the main island of Cedar Key is about 3 miles offshore from the mainland. So
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of jutting out there into the Gulf of Mexico in the Wakasasa Bay, and our clam beds are around the island, within 2 miles of the island, on both sides, and all
Gotcha.
that backwater, that shallow, muddy, sandy estuary water.
Gotcha. Okay. And then talk to us a little bit about like what's the life cycle of a clam? How long does it take? All of
Sure.
that.
So everywhere else in North America, it takes about 24 months to grow a clam from basically the larva stage. Larva is not the right word, but from the tiniest little beginnings of a clam to where you can sell it for someone to eat. 24 months everywhere else in North America, but because of those collection of positive attributes we talked about the Cedar Key waters, it only takes about 16 months here. So
Mm.
that's an extraordinary advantage when you save all that extra time. And how it starts is we start in what's essentially a lab environment. It's not really a lab; they're big fiberglass tubs, but it's ran with the scrutiny of a lab, where we by manipulating water temperatures and algae levels, we can trick adult clams into spawning. We can make them pretty much spawn whenever we want,
Mm.
and millions of tiny, nearly microscopic clams will be spawned, and that's in what's called a hatchery. There are only a handful of hatcheries in the state, and most clam farmers don't get involved in that portion of it because it really is a really controlled lab type environment, just to make sure that you don't have any impurities and that you get the best tiny little microscopic clams that you can. But when they reach about 1 millimeter in size, then lots of clam farmers will jump into the operation there. We'll take those little
Mm.
tiny 1 millimeter clams, just about the end of your fingernail, and we'll put them into what we call raceways. Raceways are long, shallow fiberglass trays, and they're in like barn-like buildings that are hanging out over the water, or right along the edge of the water. And we'll pump in water from the Gulf, nutrient dense water, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
cascade it over these long, shallow fiberglass trays so that these tiny, vulnerable clams can get nutrient dense water but be out of a predator environment. They'll stay there in those long trays for 2 to 3 months on average until they reach about 4 millimeters in size. So then they're just about half the size of a whole fingernail.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll put them into these 4 foot by 4 foot mesh bags, and we'll put them into nursery bags. So they have little tiny holes, so the little tiny clams don't fall out, but nutrients can wash in and out of the bags. And we'll put 12,000 for every one of these 4 foot by 4 foot bags, and we'll go stake them down to the Gulf of Mexico on the clam leases that we lease, 2 acre parcels at a time from the state. And they'll stay out there for about 3 or 4 months on average. 3 months is a good time, and we'll go pull all those bags up again. And now they'll be big enough to transplant into different bags. They're still 4 feet by 4 feet, but the holes are a lot bigger. And we'll take what had been 12,000 clams and we'll break it down into 1,200 clams. So for every one nursery bag that we plant out there, we hope to make about 10 what we
Mm.
call grow out
Okay.
bags. And then we'll
Yep.
take them right back out there, and they'll just sit there for about another year, and then they're ready to be harvested. And kind of what's great about the clam industry here in Cedar Key is, if you're not a wholesaler, if you're just a regular farmer, we're required to sell our clams directly to a wholesaler. Well, the wholesalers are right here on the island. So if we go get, say, 40 baskets of clams, maybe $5,000 worth of clams, we harvest them. We put the boat on the trailer with all the clams on it. We take it across the island to the wholesaler. They get processed right there. They get tumbled, inspected, graded, put into the bags, and ready to ship that day. And we get handed a check. It's a completely self contained ecosystem and economy right here on our island.
Okay. So you said that you have to sell them to the wholesalers.
Yeah, and the reason for that is it creates a chain of custody so that if there are ever any problems, if we ever have any bacteria or any kind of bad clams, those clams can be tracked all the way back to the individual farmer and the individual leased parcel from where they come from, so that the state can come in and test the water, close the waters if need be. It's just a way of handling food safety so that people can feel comfortable that they're
Mm,
getting a safe product.
interesting. Okay, so then how often does that happen?
So it's different for different folks. It depends on how big your farm is. But I think a small family farmer here with maybe, three or $400,000 worth of clams they grow every year, they're probably harvesting twice a week and
Okay.
selling an order of, between 2,500 and $5,000 worth of clams a couple times a week.
Yeah.
For some of the bigger farmers, it can be every single day.
Yeah.
And ideally, every time, let's say if I go out and pull up 50,000 clams. Ideally, I want to plant 50,000 clams sometime that week so that you can constantly
Yes.
keep them in rotation. There's not a season for clam farming. Our little baby clams don't like to be moved in and out of the water in the hot part of the summer. But
Yes.
otherwise, it's 12 months out of the year, we're clam farming.
Okay. All right. And so there's after you put them out in the grow bags, there's really nothing you're out there doing. It's not like you're out there, you know, feeding them or anything. They're only eating what's in the water and cleaning the water is what it's actually doing, correct?
Yeah, correct. And that's what
Okay.
once you get them out there, then they're just like little cash registers out there. They're just ding ding ding, getting bigger and becoming more valuable.
Mhm.
But while those are sitting, you're later that same week you're harvesting others to take and go sell, and then you're having to plant others to take their place. And then somewhere along that way, you're doing the transplanting of taking the nursery clams and pulling them and putting them into the grow out bag. So there's you kind of find a rhythm about what works with
Mhm.
your life. And it's been perfect for me because I have another business, and I'm a writer. I'm a playwright and a novelist, and that takes up my
Yes.
time. So I've been able to work clam farming around some other things that I do, and it's fantastic. A few days a week, I get to feel like Ernest Hemingway out battling the
Yeah.
elements out on the Gulf.
Absolutely. Okay, so talk to me a little bit then about some of the challenges that you face in clam farming.
Sure. So I think the biggest existential threat to clam farming in Florida is that the water is getting warmer. And I know that this is a politically fraught issue, and it's hard to bring up the changing climate without tribal battle lines being drawn. And I really am not interested in that. I'm interested in the data. And regardless of
Mm,
your political
yes.
perspective, and I'm a reasonably conservative Southern guy, but the data is the data, and the Gulf of Mexico is getting warmer every year. Every year that I've
Mhm.
been a clam farmer for the last 5 years, it's gotten warmer. And last year, July 3rd, 4th, and 5th were the three hottest days we've ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico, the water temperature. So there's a
Wow.
limit to how hot the water can get where you can still grow a viable product. And it's not just for
Yeah.
clams. I mean, there are a whole number of species that are being threatened by warming waters. You probably know that the Alaskan opilio and snow crab market completely collapsed when billions of crabs simply vanished. The
Mhm.
water got too
Mhm.
warm. Their food
Yes.
moved a little further north, out of the waters that American crabbers could fish, and all the crabs left. So this is an issue that that's being faced worldwide, and I think is going to be more prevalent and more pressing as time goes on. So that's
Mhm.
I think is our biggest systemic existential threat. Some of the other
Mhm.
threats are just that you're dealing with nature, and nature's a moving target. I like to describe the Gulf of Mexico as the great provider. It's a rich bounty. It takes care of us most of the time. But sometimes it's an angry God, and it comes to collect a
Mhm.
toll. And it doesn't matter if you're ready to pay it or not, or whether you can afford to pay it. When it comes for you, it comes for you. And certainly we've experienced that here on the island. We've had four major hurricanes in 13 months, which is
Wow.
just historically mind-boggling. So we've been paying our toll here 10 times over. We're feeling a little punch drunk from it. So there's that. Another issue that we have is that we have a big competitor market in Virginia. The university system and the state legislature in Virginia have poured tons of money into helping cultivate, research, provide genetics for a reliable, consistent clam seed. And we're just behind the curve here in Florida on that. Basically, there are 3 or 4, maybe 5 hatcheries that control all of the clam seed, all of the microscopic hatchery seed for the whole market. And it doesn't take much for that to be disrupted, where the whole market falls in on itself. So I think the
Hmm.
second biggest threat we face is that we're being outcompeted on the availability of safe, reliable, reasonably inexpensive seed.
Okay. And is that because bigger growers are buying them up, or is that because there's just not the availability there once was?
So luckily, we don't have too big of bad of an issue here in Florida of because there are a limited number of clam leases. And once you have a
Gotcha.
clam lease, you can hang on to it for as long as you meet the minimum growing requirements. So it's not like a Monsanto is going to come in and buy up all of our clam leases. It is
Correct.
true that the larger farmers and the wholesalers that also grow their own clams, they get top priority from the hatchery guys. Smaller guys like me, we have to kind of wheel and deal and scratch and claw to make sure we get enough clam seed. But that's less of an issue than there's just a bottleneck. When you just have a very small number of people producing the means of production for an entire industry, one hurricane, one fire at a facility, one death, anything like that could really bottleneck the whole system. And
Hmm.
Virginia, to their credit, has recognized that the industry has too many benefits to not support, too many economic benefits, too many cultural benefits all around the country, but certainly here in Florida. The blue collar working waterfront is disappearing into the crush of development. And I think that Virginia has recognized that the working waterfront is part of their cultural history, and so they put in resources and time and experts to protect it. And so a lot of my life is spent lobbying, giving presentations, doing whatever I can to convince lawmakers and folks in power that this is an industry worth protecting, and not just because it supports so many of the paychecks, and not just because of the cultural implications, but because it cleans the water. Everywhere on Earth where salt and fresh water and land meet, those estuaries are among the most important and the most fragile ecosystems on Earth, and clams support them. Whenever you
Hmm.
have a thriving clam population, the breakwaters for hurricanes and for storm surge, the things that are causing rampant coastal change, clams are a first line defense against that. So I'm all in on the benefits of clam farming and on the need to protect it on an institutional level.
Hmm. I know, the holidays aren't even here yet, but it's never too early to start dreaming about your spring planting. At the Farm on Central, you can pre order willows, elderberries, blackberries, blueberries, ginger, and turmeric, and more right now to guarantee you'll have your favorite varieties ready to plant when the planting season rolls around. We've got over a dozen new varieties this year, with more being added every day. Whether it's cuttings in February or rooted plants in mid-spring, get ahead of the game and pre-order your spring plants today at shop.farmoncentral.com. That's shop.farmoncentral.com. Okay, so then in Virginia, have they basically their state hatcheries for the clams? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, exactly. In their state university system, I don't know the exact which of the two off the top of my head, but two of their state university systems have thriving aquaculture programs where they have dedicated scientists and researchers constantly working on how do we make a better clam, how do we grow them better, how do we support them, and we just don't have that here. And the guys that are running the hatcheries are, they're sharp guys. They're good at what they do here in Florida, and they're good businessmen, but they're not by and large scientists. And
Mm-hmm.
you just
Yes.
can't compete with state university system and state legislature money supporting an industry. And so the bell that I'm out ringing in every session of our legislature that they'll let me come get in front of lawmakers, that's the bell I'm ringing. That everyone says, and it's such a popular thing. I mean, lawmakers will let me in their offices always to talk about I'm a farmer. We're doing something
Hmm.
that's both good for the economy and good for the environment. It's an easy thing for politicians to feel good about because it's a good storyline, but we haven't yet bridged the gap in Florida between the good story and the money and commitment required to keep the story going.
Absolutely. So then, talk to about the impact of a hurricane. Was there any of the nurseries for the clam seed on your actual island, or is that more inland?
Yeah, so no, they're all in the coastal areas, but they were a little further south. So Hurricane Milton did
Okay.
have a significant impact on one of our hatcheries. I don't think enough to disrupt the industry this time, but already I'm hearing reports that there'll probably be enough seed coming from that hatchery to support the bigger farmers, but the smaller guys are probably out of luck this year. So it just doesn't take much. But as far as the impact on here on the island in Cedar Key, when we have a big hurricane like this, where there's a lot of storm surge, which was the case in Idalia 13 months ago, and then doubly so in Helene about a month ago, billions of metric tons of additional mud and sand wash onto our clam leases and bury up all of our bags. So it's a
Ooh.
mad dash to try to shake out our bags and get them unburied. Clams need to be able to get to the water. We
Hmm.
always talk about planting them because it's something that people can think about. We say we're farmers just underwater, and we do put them. We do stake the bags down to the mud and sand, and they do kind of bury themselves up a little bit down into it, but they get all of their nutrients from the water. So when you bring in all of this massive amount of extra mud and sand and everything else and piled on top of them, they don't have a way to get to the nutrients in the water, and fairly quickly they start starving and dying. And we've lost a significant amount of the crop here over the last 13 months between these two massive storms.
Gotcha. So you just can't get them out fast enough, or they're just buried too deep. I'm assuming with a
Well,
very large
we can normally
hurricane.
find them now. Sometimes, and sometimes they just get completely blown away. For instance, I had a little over 1 million clams that I had just transplanted from the nursery stage to the grow out bags, where they should be able to just sit there for a year.
Hmm.
But the particular lease that I was planting them on was a little softer, muddier bottom, and the clams love that. They grow fast and beautiful there, but there's not a lot for the of firm ground to hold the stakes down. So when Hurricane
Gotcha.
Helene came through, it just had those 1,100 clam bags had no chance against the powerful storm surge. And then the next morning, I had 1,140 something bags had been swept completely out of the water and up into the trees on a barrier
Oh
island,
wow.
way far away. And you can just say, well, hey, there's $120,000 hanging in a tree
Wow.
that's gone forever. So it's
Yeah.
these storms are serious business. These two have been the only that really caused us any trouble for the past 10 or 15 years. But as a 1-2 punch back to back, because it takes so long to grow a clam, because it takes 16 months, when you lose your crop, you're 16 months away from another penny coming back into your pocket. And there aren't a lot of smaller mom and pop clam farmers that can sustain that kind of loss.
Yes. Yeah. Um, so you said the lease size is is 2 acres, and what does the government charge for that?
So the cost to the government is actually pretty nominal. It's $36 per acre per year. So no, I'm
Okay.
sorry, $16 per acre per year. So $32 for a 2 acre lease for the whole year. The issue is that there are a limited number of leases, so
Correct.
people don't just get rid of them. So you can't just show up and say, "Hey, I'd like my lease from the government." You have to go find someone that's willing to sell one, and it costs normally between $3,000 and $10,000 to buy the right to take over a lease. So their
Oh
startup
wow.
capital there. The seed is very expensive. It costs $9,000 for 1 million of the tiny baby seed, and it costs about $10 a bag. And you need 1,000 of those bags to grow that million that we
Yeah.
just talked about. And then you have to all the PVC stakes, and then the specialized boat, and the gear, and the gas, and the crew. Like any other farming endeavor, there's a lot of upfront money. But in clam farming, we call it the year of pain, but it's really 16 months of pain because you're pouring in tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars to get a clam farm started. And then if
Correct.
everything goes right, 16 months later, you'll get your first paycheck.
Yes.
Now, but when it's good, it's real, real good. Like a lot of farming, sometimes it's so good you feel like you're stealing, and then other times
Yes.
other times it feels like you're beating yourself to death and paying, taking a huge loss for the privilege of getting to be a farmer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. Fascinating. Very fascinating. Talk a little bit about kind of like the culture of the town. I'm assuming there's a fair amount of tourism where you are as well.
So, what's great about Cedar Key is that we have the unique distinction of being the only coastal community in Florida where tourism is not our primary economic engine. It's aquaculture by a wide margin, well, by a comfortable margin. Clam
Mm.
farming and oyster farming. Now, we love to have guests here on the island, and we say all the time, we'd love you to come for a weekend and spend some money and then leave. So we definitely have a tourism component here, but it's different. We don't have white sand beaches on the main island. Now you can get on a boat and go out to one of our barrier islands and find a secluded, beautiful beach and not see another person all day long, which is really a thing you
Yeah.
can't do almost anywhere else in Florida. But when you come to the main island here of Cedar Key, it doesn't look like a tourist town. It looks like a fishing village that's lost in time. It's very blue collar. You'll see clam boats and crab traps piled up in on people's yards. It really has a character that's, it's a bygone era. And there are those of us here that love it and that are here because of that. And we want to do everything we can to protect it. But there's a history in Florida of these big storms causing transformational development in places. For instance, in 2018, when Hurricane Michael hit the state, Mexico Beach was another of the blue collar working class quaint fishing villages. And within just a handful of years after that, the folks that lost everything and didn't have insurance, which is a whole other issue here in Florida, they just
Yes.
couldn't afford to rebuild. So moneyed interests showed up and bought everything up. And now, if you go to Mexico Beach, it looks like Siesta Key or Fort
Yeah.
Myers or anywhere else in Florida. We're keen here on this island to be the last best hope for the old working waterfront in Florida. We're going to do everything we can to hold out for as long as we can.
Absolutely. So you said there's also oysters too. You got clams and oysters.
Yeah, we grow oysters too. The oyster market here is much smaller. Sometimes I say that trying to be an oyster farmer is like having a wife and a girlfriend. It's just nonstop, constant headache. The oysters want to
Okay.
die. Their favorite thing is to die, and so there's a vastly larger profit margin in the oysters. But there is just some voodoo mysticism involved in being a good oyster farmer that is beyond my capabilities. So the folks that do it are good at it. We grow beautiful, amazing, tasty oysters here, but it's still sort of a niche industry here because they're just so hard to keep alive. In the Apalachicola Bay used to be the world-renowned place to get oysters in Florida,
Yes.
a little north of
Yes.
here, and years of nutrients washing down the rivers and pollution for the rivers running into it have made that bay almost completely unable to sustain oil. You can hardly get an oyster in Apalachicola
Wow.
anymore. But
Wow.
but here in Cedar Key, because of all the clean water and the long stretch of no development, we have prime oyster growing water here. The industry is just a little bit in its infancy here. Now we have a wild oyster farming, or not farming, but a wild caught oyster industry here, and that is a wild west kind of rough and tumble business. These guys go out and the state tells them where they can go harvest these wild oysters, and it is back-breaking, grueling work. But we love our oystermen here, and they bring in a pretty significant catch of wild caught oysters. But the farming industry, really, clams dominate here by a wide margin.
Gotcha. Okay. And so then I'm assuming with the oysters as well, the well caught ones, that they have to sell those to the wholesalers as well.
Correct. Yeah, it's
Okay.
just like with any other kind of fishing or live food product here in Florida. We want to make sure that they're handled properly, that best management practices are happening, and by taking them, you have a certain amount of time. It's much more restrictive for oysters. about how long you have and at what hours of the day you're allowed to bring the oysters to the wholesalers. For clams, we have a time frame, an amount of hours between when we pull them out of the water and when they have to be in the coolers at the wholesaler. But it's a great process because it allows the public to know that facilities that are being routinely and closely inspected by the government, by the FDA, by the FDA, by all the folks that control food safety, that's happening with this product. So I wouldn't want to go buy a bucket of oysters from a guy that just went and pulled them out of the water, and I don't know him from Adam. Maybe they're great.
Yes.
Maybe they've been sitting in his boat all weekend. But this way, if you buy an oyster that's come through the proper channels or a clam, you can feel really good about what you're getting.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you're going to get it from the right spot. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, I mean, I think that's it. I'd love for folks to check out our industry. We made a short film about what we do called "Rise of the Clambassador." It's the Clambassador is a little character I play here for the kids on the island and to help market the industry. I'm like the ambassador for the clam industry, so they call me the Clambassador. And we made a little what we thought was going to be an industry film called "Rise of the Clambassador." You can watch it for free on Vimeo or YouTube. But we entered it into a few film festivals, and it just started winning everything. It won the International Ocean Film Festival. It won the Paris Short Film Festival, the Austin Film Festival, because it shows a group of people in a special place being joyful about farming and being joyful about a thing they do that takes care of the environment. So we'd love you to check that out, and it just gives you a really beautiful overview of, well, my best friend here on the island is the mayor, our friendship, and how our friendship is exhibited through clam farming. We'd love you to check it out and give us a few months to get cleaned up from this last storm, but we'd also love you to come to Cedar Key and come see us.
Okay, awesome. And your website is michaelpresleyBobbitt.com. Obviously, we'll link to that in the
I'd
show
love you to check
notes
that out too. You can read all about my novel, Godspeed Cedar Key, set here on the island, covering a 180-year history of this special place. The book is just going bananas all over the country. The audio book was just released, and people are loving it. Love you to check that out and just see what we do and get your hands on Cedar Key. And we love you to come, and we'd love to show you around.
Yes, I'll give you a couple months, but I would love to get down there. I really enjoy the uncommercialized parts of places when we go. So
man, come on, I'll put you on a clam boat. We'll do some fishing. We'll go pull some clams up, and we'll pull them out of the water, and an hour later we'll cook them up and eat them at my house.
Oh, that sounds like a dream. All right,
man, thanks for talking with me today. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.